Hi, friends. Welcome to the Mobile Bev Pros podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing mobile bar and event professionals with the information they need to succeed. I'm your host, business coach, and founder of the Mobile Bar Academy, Sarah Murphy. In each episode, the Mobile Bev Pros team will bring you industry experts, information, anecdotes, and opinions with the goal of assisting you in building a profitable, sustainable, and successful business that supports you in creating wealth. I'm excited to share with you today's episode, so let's get started. Today on the podcast, we have the honor of speaking with Rock Lalvani. He serves as the Chief Profitability Adviser for business owners. He's a huge fan and practitioner of Profit First, which made him a natural fit for our podcast. As anyone who's been around any of our programming knows that I am a super fan of both Mike MICHALOWICZ, but also the Profit First system. It is, in my opinion, an absolute mandatory practice if you are going to be a small business owner. And today we're going to geek out on all of the things that Profit First does and allows for as an entrepreneur, but also we'll talk a little bit more about what Rocky offers business owners who are Profit First curious. Maybe they started the process, they read the book, but they're really scared or intimidated about implementing it. And we will go from there. Rocky, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, so you told me just before we started recording that you have recorded about 100 podcasts on this topic. So you are super well-versed on your talking points regarding Profit First. Why don't you start this podcast off by sharing with us perhaps your favorite thing to tell people or to share with people about this process?
You end up with a lot more cash and a lot more sleep. That's literally what it comes down to.
It's so true.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you know you have enough money in the bank. You know that if something happens, because things happen in life, you can survive for 2 or 3 months, right? Even if there's no revenue coming in the door. You know that you're going to be able to stroke checks when you have to stroke checks. You're going to know that when the CPA says you owe the government $10,000, you go, and then you stroke the check.
Yeah, I'm a success story. I started practicing Profit First in April of 2018, I think, something like that. And I'd really kind of hit momentum in year 2019. In 2020, COVID happened and shut down my business. And it shut down every other event-based business in the country. And at first, I was obviously like, what am I going to do? But then I was able to breathe because I knew in my bank account I had 6 months of reserve to pay myself as well as to pay my obligations. I had overhead at the time. I had a warehouse. I had rent that had to be paid, even though we weren't bringing in any money. But I knew I had 6 months to figure it out.
That's what it's all about. That right there.
Yeah, this year I had to write the government a $46,000 tax check, and I didn't bat an eye because I knew where it was. It was already in my tax account, and so it was a small salary for someone, but I was like, no sweat. I'm just going to write the check and be done with it.
Congratulations.
It felt good to not have to worry about a debt like that.
And that's literally what it's about. Profit First is, I'll call it a lazy cash flow system, in the sense that you don't have to learn accounting, right? You don't have to change your behaviors much. As a matter of fact, these days you can automate the entire thing. And there are platforms that will automate it for you. Are you familiar with Relay?
I was going to actually ask this question of you. Relay is the bank that partners, or Mike MICHALOWICZ has partnered with, that is Profit First approved. I prefer Novo, but we recommend either or to our clients.
Whatever works for you. You know, it doesn't matter to me. The thing with Relay is it will automatically move the money where the money needs to go. And so you don't even have to do anything other than sign up and set your allocation. So it's a pretty lazy cash flow system, right? And after a few months, if everything goes well, you're sitting on tons of cash in a variety of different places and excess cash. And if you aren't, then it's a wake-up call to your business, right? You said you were going to be able to pay yourself and you don't have any money to pay yourself. Why is that? What's wrong? So then it's usually, it's a pricing issue. it's a too much spending issue. It's maybe not enough sales issue. So all of these things, but at least it tells you up front, hey, there's a problem. Not, hey, you owe the IRS $46,000 and you going, how am I supposed to pay that bill?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing that I have been able to leverage since implementing Profit First, especially in this current economy with the super high interest rates, is putting my tax obligation into a high yield savings account. It had to sit out there anyways, right? I had to be putting aside that money for the government anyways. It might as well be making me a little bit of money. And so with the current interest rates, my obligation last year of $46,000 was also making me about $250 of cash each month that I got to just keep.
And that is the big thing that we started telling our business owners probably, I don't know when interest rates skyrocketed, but probably 2 years ago. We're like, hey, if you're sitting on cash balances, so it could be deposit checks, right? If you're doing a good volume of business and you're sitting on 20 or $30,000 in deposit checks, yeah, you can make money on that. Your tax account, your profit account, or, sometimes if you're successful, then yeah, you have extra cash sitting around and you might as well earn 5% on it.
Yeah, absolutely. My owner's pay is also in a high yield savings account. I don't have my operating expenses in a high yield savings account, and I don't have my employee pay in a high yield savings account just because those are like variable. I use those in various different ways, but everything else that I'm going to sit on is in high yield savings account.
So the other thing is to talk to your bank because some banks do have what are called sweep accounts. And what they do is they will every night they'll move the money to a higher interest rate. And then when you need the money or when you start writing checks, they move the money to cover it. Again, not every bank does that. Some banks charge. You have to look at it. On the other hand, the automation of Relay or something like Relay is convenient too. So whatever works for you. This is the thing. The other day I was sitting down with some business owners and they were like, well, here's how my business works. And they were expecting me to say, well, you have to model your business into this profit first way. And I was like, no, let's just figure out how to model profit first to your business because the principles work. You just have to figure out like which accounts are for you, what allocation rhythm is for you. And sometimes you need some extra accounts. You just have to model it to you. People get stuck on three things. One, opening bank accounts. Seems people don't know how to open bank accounts. It's like this major stumbling block. I mean, seriously, they give you a lollipop when you go in. The second is when things don't work, they just stop. They don't take the signals, make changes, and continue to figure out, okay, what went wrong? What do I need to do better? And being able to do that. And the third is if they're not a standard business and it doesn't follow exactly like the book, then how do I make it work for me? And it will work for you. I deal with all kinds of businesses of all different sizes. Okay. This works in 8-figure businesses as much as it does in a 5-figure business. So it really doesn't matter.
I'm glad you mentioned kind of where people get stuck because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is it's a fairly simple, straightforward process, but there are places and spaces wherein there's friction or resistance. And you're right. The first one always is I've read the book, but I haven't opened the accounts yet. When this was first published, it was arduous. When I first implemented it in 2018, I did have to call my bank and explain to them I needed 7 accounts and I needed them labeled in different ways and then go through the process of transferring back and forth. And you could do that online, but you could only have up to 5 accounts. So if I needed transfers between those 6th and 7th account, I had to call them or so it was a bit of a pain in the butt. But tech has really facilitated this process. And it's also gained a lot of traction with accountants. So when I first started practicing it, my accountant was like, I have no idea what this is. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why are there so many transactions? Why am I just moving money from one to the next? This is a pain in my butt. And now it's invisible to the accountant. It all happens on, I want to say it's like on a visual level, but it doesn't actually do that those moving of monies on the actual statement. So the accountant, just does their thing of money in, money out, and it doesn't necessarily have to see all of the transactions anymore. And so there really is no excuse when it comes to, I haven't started the bank account yet, when it comes to not implementing Profit First.
So I guess you're using one of those things that's more virtual, right?
So much like Relay, Novo, any money that comes in will automatically distribute into what they call reserves based on the percentages that you have set up. You can see where all the envelopes are and what's in them, but when you print off your statement, all you see is money in and money out. You don't see the envelopes or different transactions into different accounts.
What happens if you spend too much in one account?
It will take from the general balance. So I use my operating
Mm.
account as the general balance. And so typically I wouldn't pay from an account that didn't have enough to cover it. But if you did, it would just come out of the available balance, which is my operating account.
So my only concern with that is if you don't feel the pain, like if it's not causing you to bounce checks and it's not causing you pain of, hey, you got to do something, and it just kind of happens in the background, it takes a little of the sting out. We want the sting, right?
Let's talk more about the sting then, because and I feel very blessed in the fact that prior to getting into my own business, I was the executive director of profitability for a $25 million company. So I'm pretty good with money as it is, but I've set my business up and my percentages up so that they're pretty honed in. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like, where should I be feeling this sting?
You're disciplined in the sense that you've got good percentages and everything is working, right?
It seems to be.
Yeah. 80% of business owners aren't disciplined and they're doing things that aren't perfect, and they need to feel the slap when things don't go well. That's the whole system. This is an emotional system, right? It's emotionally driven to help you by constraining you. And if you don't feel that, oh, you ran out of money, like you just get an email and you go, oh, whatever, there's no sting.
I see what you're saying. So one of the things that I appreciate about Profit First is that there was a point last year where there was a few different phases in business. And one of the more cash hungry phases is the growth phase. And since this is a cash-based system, it feels relevant here. We were in growth phase. And so we were throwing a lot of cash at these investments that would help us scale. So cash was tighter. Our cash flow was very neutral for a while. It was at some point, like one month, it might be down a little bit, but we had reserves, and one month it might be higher. And there was a real reckoning when I took a look at my accounts one month and I noticed that we had less runway than I prefer to have in those accounts. We then did what I call pulling levers. So we have sales levers available to us. Sometimes we call them super efforts. When you don't have sufficient cash, although I did have sufficient cash, I could see that there could be a point down the road where I did not have sufficient cash. We pulled those sales levers, and that enabled us to get a cash influx that then, we were able to continue on. We also at the same time did the cut spending, anything that was potentially coming up for annual renewal. We switched to monthly renewal again because we wanted to protect cash flow. But I see what you're saying. And that's one of the reasons I like Profit First so much is that you have visibility in kind of what's happening with your cash.
How did you know, though, that you were going to have a cash shortfall?
One of my favorite metrics is looking at employee pay, that account. I want to have at least 2 to 3 payrolls in there, no matter what. And we had gotten down to about 3 payrolls. And so that I knew was a red flag. Now we have a savings account as well. I don't know if everybody does that, but I do have a savings account just in case we decide, hey, we're going to spend on a thing we didn't know that we were going to spend on. And so I knew that was there, but I still don't like to touch it. But that's my favorite metric.
So you were looking at cash balances and realized they were a little low for what you wanted. And that is one of the beauty of Profit First is you start to feel your money, right? You didn't need to do math. You're like, uh-oh, that's a little low. And you took action. And that's literally what it's designed to do. The other thing, and I just wanted to mention this, one of the number one reasons for failure and bankruptcy is growth. And it's because growth takes cash and people don't figure out how much cash they need to grow. And if you don't, you're going to get yourself in trouble because you're going to grow beyond the cash you have. And then all of a sudden, one day everything blows up. And this is why I tell business owners more sales may not fix your problems. And a lot of times they can aggravate them because now you're working even harder and you have no money.
I love that you brought that up. I was just listening to a podcast from, it was an online business owner who talked as though this was like a commonly understood thing, which maybe it is in her space. But she talked about the fact that during COVID, a lot of people scaled up their online businesses because more people were buying online than ever before. And people were scaling up their businesses. They were building agencies, they were taking on employees, they were taking on, more work. And what they found is that they were working more, they were spending more, but they were getting paid less. Them as the owner was making less money over time. And so we've seen a correction or a reversal of that recently, wherein a lot of these agencies are paring back or they're scaling back. They're now doing more coaching, they're doing more group programs, they're doing more courses, and they're not doing the done for you agency work anymore. And that really turned a light on for me because I had seen that happen. I had seen so many once done for you agencies now kind of convert into more of this coaching and or here's a digital asset type thing. And it was, I think, very much in relation to what you were just talking about, is that they grew and they scaled and they invested in all of this overhead and this infrastructure that ultimately did make the business bigger, but it made their paycheck smaller.
And so this is true for big business as it is for little business, right? Peloton pretty much blew up during that whole thing because they thought people were going to keep buying their bicycles forever. And the reality is they weren't. So they went out and built big factories and it didn't work out. The same thing happened when we came out of COVID. So people don't realize a lot of the retailers, Nike, even Costco and so forth, they were expecting people to keep buying. And I think it was probably would have been 22 into 23, people shifted their habits again as we started to open back up. And so all this stuff was coming in and people stopped buying it. And part of it was also inflation. Part of it was economic factors. And so that created a shift. And a lot of these companies were dumping merchandise because they had to. They had no choice. They had to clear it out. And so don't think the big guys are smart because they got the same problems as you do. It's just there's more zeros at the end of their problems. This is just commonplace in the world of business. It is up and down. It's a roller coaster, and the people like Nike's got enough cash that they don't have to worry about it, right? They'll survive. Don't feel bad for them, but they can lose a ton of money in those moments. Unfortunately, Peloton did not have enough cash, so they ran into more trouble. And that's why, business owners have this allergy to cash, right? They see cash, they're like, "Oh, I got to spend it." No, you don't. You really don't.
I love that you talked about that. There's a cautionary tale that I have from a client of mine who did a giant event. It was a multi-day event and it was about a $250,000 payday for them. And they had never made a single sale that large, and they had never had so much cash on hand afterwards. And I think they walked away profit with about $160,000 of that, which is huge, right? Like that is the thing dreams are made of in our industry. She was a one-on-one coaching client at the time, and she's given me permission to share stories because she wants to be able to help others from making the same mistake. So I should preface it with that. She told me that she had all this cash and she wasn't sure what to do with it. My advice to her was to implement profit first immediately, because we had been talking about it, but she hadn't done that yet, to talk to a financial advisor about the best use of this cash by taking a look at what her tax obligation was going to be, all the necessary things. And then for her to be able to get a good look at what she has left after all of that, and then looking at her business and her life and where the best investment for that money would go. She said she wanted to pay cash for a new minivan. And I told her that was not the best idea. It wasn't the best of investments. While she might need a new vehicle, using that much cash or tying up that much cash in a depreciating asset like that, probably. But I'm not a financial advisor, right? And come the end of the year, she ended up with a huge tax obligation she didn't have the cash for. And it seems so simple. Those tiny little decisions can really snowball over time when you don't know how to work with cash. And I think that's what it oftentimes comes down to with small business owners, is that they're not used to having large amounts of cash. They've had a salary most of their life. If they've had large amounts of cash, it's usually been from the sale of a giant asset like a home, which then just goes into buying another home. And so what to do with all of this money does feel like this is the opportunity for me to check some things off my list that I've been wanting and never had the money to have. And it's a bit like a hot potato. As soon as they get it, to your point, like they feel like they have to get rid of it. But I think it's because they're just really uncomfortable holding the hot potato. They're uncomfortable having so much of something they're not used to holding.
People who win the lottery and people who get an inheritance usually lose it within a short period of time because they don't know how to manage cash. They see a big chunk of cash and they decide to spend it. And they don't realize, hey, there's a tax bill, there's a this. And more often than not, it just might be, oh, I forgot that all of these invoices were coming due from that event that they didn't send for 60 days because those business owners, and this happens a lot, don't know how to bill and they don't send invoices till really late or they forget them. I got my house cleaned for free when we sold our rental because I called like 5 times to get the bill and they never sent it. And then the house got sold and then life went on. Like, I don't know how you stay in business when you don't send a bill, but it is common. That's the case.
And the reality is most businesses don't stay in business. We know that the failure rate of small businesses is really high, especially once you get to like 5 years, 8 years, and 10 years. And cash flow is the number one killer of businesses. And so not billing, not invoicing, not handling your cash flow properly is the number one thing that will cause your business to struggle and or fail.
It is. I mean, businesses fail for one simple reason: they run out of cash. And this is literally the simplest, easiest, probably most proven cash flow management system that anyone can implement. Worst case, you go buy the book for $20 and you can do it yourself. I mean, this isn't like one of these things where we see so often in business, this secret recipe, or, you have to buy our $5,000 software or pay for. Yeah, go get the book from the library. Like, seriously, it's that simple. You can even watch videos on YouTube on how to implement it. And I know, because in the world of business, there's a lot of people trying to get your money and they're overcharging.
So as I mentioned, I was the whatever my title was. It was like the Chief Profitability Officer for a very large restaurant company. And one of the things that I was responsible for was creating the budgets, closing the books, then updating those budgets with real and actual numbers, and then providing those to the management so that they had the information that they needed in order to make managerial decisions around the money that they had been allocated. The problem with that system is that it is retrospective. You are looking back. So I was closing the books for, it's now April. I would close the books for March. I would update the budget. I would give them the budget for what has happened for January, February, March. They would look at it and they would say, okay, cool. I would say, can you explain these expenses? And they're like, that was 3 weeks ago, Sarah. I don't really remember what happened. Or, Sarah, I would like to buy more spoons, but it's going to be $500 more than what I have available in my budget. Can I get myself spoons? And it's like, well, I don't know. It's the end of April. I haven't closed the books yet. I really need to know what you've spent already. So I will let you know on the 5th of May. It was such a clunky system. And ever since learning about Profit First, I just think about how much easier my life would have been and how much easier my managers' lives would have been if they had real-time access to the information they needed as to whether or not they had the cash. Because of course we had cash. The restaurants bank accounts had $200,000 each in it, but that was just all lumped in. It wasn't usable information. They didn't know how much of that 200,000 was for operations and salaries and overhead, utilities and rent. They didn't know. It was just a big giant chunk. And that's what happens with our mobile bar industry as well, is when you have one bank account and it looks good, it's fat, it's got $50,000 in there because it's the high season, you're getting all those deposits, all those final payments. And you're like, all right, we got money to spend. Let's buy that equipment. Let's hire that additional staffer. Let's do the things that we've been waiting to do. And then you have all these expenses, or then like all of these things come in that you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't realize that was part of that 50,000. And now we get ourselves in trouble because the accounting method of like P&L and balancing your books and looking at the credits and debits, that's retrospective. It's all looking back as to what was spent and how it was allocated. Cash is current. It's right now. It's in the now. And if you have it allocated properly using the Profit First system, you have a much better ability to make managerial decisions in real time about where that money is and where it should go.
So the number one thing I tell business owners who get deposits is to have a separate deposit account and put all the deposits in the deposit account and do not take money out until the event occurs. Because if the event gets canceled or you have to refund it, or when you have to pay the bills for the event, you want the cash there to cover it. And by leaving it in the deposit account, you know that is not your money. So you could look at the account and go, the account's fat. Yeah, it's fat because you got prepaid. It's not your money, technically. And so
Yeah.
you have to wait.
It is hard in this industry. I'm going to give the listeners a little bit of a pass here. We're a seasonal business, and oftentimes we are paying ourselves and all of our overhead through those leaner months on the deposits that we're getting for events that are going to be happening in the future, especially when you're first getting started. If you don't spend those deposits, you won't make it 9 months until that wedding. So it's a little harder in our industry, but once you get going and you start getting more deposits and more business, you can then correct for that.
Here's the one thing. Once you get yourself up and on ramp, what we tell you is when you hit the busy season, we set a maximum for the month. So let's say I do 120,000 a year, 10 grand a month, right? But as you said, January through March, I do nothing. So what I do then is all of a sudden, if we start having $20,000 months, instead of allocating the full 20,000, we only allocate 10,000. We take the extra 10,000, or at least the excess allocations on that money, and we put it in a separate account that's called Winter is Coming. Because you know what? Winter is coming. So that next winter, when winter comes, you go, winter's here. Oh, look, there's $30,000 in my winter is coming. I can get through January, February, and March. And there's no problem. That's what we do. Because that way you don't have to worry about it.
Yes. And that is the way that I recommend people think about their money once they start making consistent revenue. And if you are lucky enough to start this business with a sizable amount of cash, so you have a few $1,000s to invest in the business, hold on to your cash flow, especially when you're getting ramped, so that you don't have to use those deposits in order to carry yourself during that initial on-ramp. The challenge that we get is that a lot of people who start in this industry are bootstrapping with very little money. So they might have a couple $100 to start this business with. And that's one of the beautiful things I love about this business is you really can build a successful mobile bar business with just a little bit of money. There's not a whole lot of overhead. There isn't a high threshold in order to get into this industry, but you do have to be scrappy and you do have to be really cognizant about those dollars and pennies. So if you have to spend your deposits in the beginning, make sure you have a contract that says your deposits are non-refundable. Make sure you're pricing yourself appropriately. The way that I like to price it is that you're making at least 100% markup. So All of your expenses will be paid with 50% of the revenue. This is important because we're seasonal businesses. We don't work 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Some weeks you get 2 events, some weeks you get one event, some weeks you get no events. And so we definitely have to have a good, solid understanding of our industry and how to make it work.
That you do. And, all of this stuff is predictable. People act like these are emergencies. They're not emergencies. You knew when the slow season was, you knew when the busy season was, you know that your mobile bar's tires are going bald and that you're going to need new tires one day. Like all of this stuff is predictable. And that's just life. And so be prepared for these things that are going to happen, because if you actually took a moment to think, you would realize that they are happening. And then you can correct for it ahead of time and plan for it. And then it's not a problem. Like you said, tax time wasn't an emergency. It wasn't a surprise. We knew it was going to happen. And so when it happened, we dealt with it. And
Yeah.
that happens in a lot of different places. And I just find a lot of business owners are just shocked that their 27-year-old piece of equipment broke and that was an emergency.
Yeah. A lot of the people that come into this industry do not come from a background of having a lot of experience handling money. There just hasn't been a whole lot of money to handle in their background. Maybe they have been very much paycheck to paycheck in their life, in their family. And this is their first opportunity of holding wealth. And I like to use that exact phrase when we talk about building wealth and making money, because we want to hold it, right? And so when we're building wealth and we're holding wealth as entrepreneurs, we have to recognize that it's okay to be uncomfortable doing so. And that just because you have never had the money to change your tires when you needed to change your tires previously, that this is the opportunity to change that narrative for yourself. That if you can be smart about the way that you work with your money, then those days of even those small unexpected expenses being emergencies can be days that are behind you.
And I agree. And here's the reality of it. Most business owners come from that background. Most business owners didn't come with a silver spoon. They're going through the same struggles you are. So this is not outside the norm. This is the norm. And this is what business owners face. And most of them don't have MBA degrees. And the MBA doesn't teach you anything anyway. So don't worry like you're missing something, right? That's just the reality of it. And it's okay, but figure out, put systems and processes in. And then profit first is kind of like the beginning step. Then we start to get into much more of the nuances. So, if you're in the liquor business, are people over pouring drinks, right? Are you delivering the right amount? The whole concept of profit first was small plates. You want to go on a diet, use a small plate. It's the same thing. If you're serving glasses of wine, are you filling them up so much that half of it gets thrown away? Are you being intentional with what is going on and appropriately reusing things that can be reused? I'm not telling you not to do things that are unsafe, and also making sure that you're pricing correctly to cover all your overhead, knowing when it's time to expand, when it's time to hire permanently versus when it's time to hire a part-time flex person. All of these things add up over time. And for most business owners, it takes time to learn it. You get a choice. You can either learn from your mistakes or someone else's. I prefer to learn from other people's mistakes. It's much, much easier.
I agree. That's why we created the Mobile Bar Academy, so everyone can see the learnings from my many mistakes starting my own mobile bar company. But also, speaking of that, you were telling me a little bit before we press the record button about a program that you have specifically for those smaller businesses that might not be ready to invest in your one-on-one containers, that not only provide them with kind of oversight into like how to implement profit first, but also have additional tools that can help them with pricing, looking at the pros and cons versus weddings versus corporate, that sort of thing. Will you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what we did, we found that a lot of people read the book, but then they struggle and then they give up. And we also knew that not everyone was a good match for having someone like us work with them month to month. Because if you're a small business, you probably don't need that level of support. And so what we did was we created a program and it's called a profit blueprint and it helps you go through every part of the business from designing what your ideal day is and how much money you need in your personal life so that you can determine how much money you need in your business and then you add those percentages from profit first and you say okay, if I need to make 100,000, well then I need to sell 400,000. So it helps you reverse engineer your business and then look at what works for you, what doesn't. And then we created a whole bunch of spreadsheets that answer all those questions. Can I hire somebody? Can I afford this new large piece of equipment or something? Where am I making my money? Is my profit coming from this kind of event or this type of event? Also, just helping you figure out, hey, if I'm going to do this event, what are all the different costs that go into that event? And am I covering it all? So it just helps you to be able to do that. And I think the bigger part of what's in there that I don't know how to make it clear to people, but you get to ask questions. And I think what happens a lot of times when you ask questions in these programs is they tell you to go watch a video. No, we'll look at your numbers and go, oh, this is what you're missing, or they don't always get it right when they set up their percentages, or they hit a hiccup and they don't know who to talk to. Within the platform, you can ask for help. And then we even have higher levels where you get some one on one time for people who are ready for that. So it really helps them get off on a strong foundation. Again, this is for somebody who already knows how to generate revenue and is bringing cash in, but doesn't still feel comfortable and doesn't know where to turn to get good advice.
That's a great clarifier in the fact that who it's for and who it's not. And this particular container that you have is very much for people who have a proven offer. So they're already generating revenue. You already know what you're offering, who's paying for that offer. You have some understanding of where the money is coming from and when it's coming in. And I think that's a good portion of our community. One of the things that I see the most when we get people into our more intimate containers, like our group coaching program, where I have insight into their financials a little bit better and their pricing, is that by and large, money is an area that they don't have a great understanding of. And so a program like yours sounds like it'd be the perfect fit for those who have started a business, they've started selling, and they want to make sure that they have those money parts of their business under control.
And the other thing that we do is we actually have cash flow planners. So you can sit down and you can look at the next 6 months and say, do I have enough money or am I going to run out? Again, it's about more cash, sleep at night. That's basically what we're trying to help them do.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this than more cash and sleep at night. So
Oh,
thank
there is a better way.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Okay. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button for Sarah, show her a little love. Come on. And then maybe someone else who's got one of these businesses and they're bitching because they don't know about their cash. Share it with them. Show a little love. That is the best way to say thank you.
Absolutely. Feel free to leave a review for the podcast and for Rocky. We'll have all his information in the show notes. Rocky, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your passion for Profit First with our community so that I had someone who really gets my passion for Profit First.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that wraps up today's episode. I hope it was valuable. I would love to hear from you what you thought. You can drop me a line at hello@mobilebevpros.com or find me on Instagram at mobilebevpros. If you're looking for more valuable mobile bar related content, we have a website full of it. You can find us at www.mobilebevpros.com. And I'd love to see you in our Facebook community, also by the name of, you guessed it, Mobile Bev Pros. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, cheers.